politely and hide my eyes whenever angry thoughts came to my mind. Grandma did what she had to do, but the times have changed, I'm telling you. The time has come for us to draw the line. Don't wait too late. Open up your eyes. Talk back, fight back. Time to organize.
Welcome to another edition of Progressive Community Media on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm John Riley. I'm also co-host of Out FM on WBAI. Out FM is a progressive lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender news, culture, and activist hour every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Progressive Community Media will feature media outlets in the New York area that offer progressive political content. And tonight's show will again be about radio station WBAI New York, 99.5 FM, part of the Progressive Pacifica Radio Network. The network was founded by leftist anti-war activists and has been fueled over the decades by the Black, women's, and LGBT movements, among many other social movements. WBAI's morning show has been revitalized by Interim Program Director Mario Murillo, who we interviewed for our last show. Tonight, we'll talk with and show some segments from the Wednesday morning edition of the WBAI Morning Show featuring Mimi Rosenberg. Mimi is a longtime lawyer with the Legal Aid Society, and she is also a broadcaster with WBAI. She is co-host of another show, Building Bridges, Your Community and Labor Report. In the next segment, Mimi describes her philosophy on what she attempts to bring to the Wednesday morning show. You're WBAI's Wednesday morning host. You get up at a phenomenally early time in the morning to do this great public service. Can you talk about what kinds of guests and segments you bring to the airwaves?
Well, I think it's, my goodness, thank you for reminding me about what time I got up. Yes, I get up very early to do the morning show, but delightedly, because what an enormously important opportunity to take hold of, not what I bring, but what I facilitate. I really consider what I do as being a vessel or a facilitator to bring the voices, the movers and shakers who are affected by the issues and policies and practices of government, and those who are in resistance to, those who are mobilizing around it. This is their spot, and it is my obligation really to bring those voices to the airwaves, to continue the process of letting them have this vehicle by which to mobilize and create the institutions that we need that are really going to change the power paradigms and really shift the balance of power back to the working class. So I am an instrument that allows for a kind of symbiotic relationship with community, with workers. I bring them here, and their voices make the programming radiate outward, and it's a very exciting and enlivening process. And I have to say that one of the most exciting things and meaningful things and distinguishing features of WBAI, as opposed to, frankly, PBS or NPR, which have some good and important programming, is that I think this programming, as I see it, is geared to make people into organizers themselves, to draw them into the process of change, and for those who are already there, to enhance their theoretical base as a foundation to better their organizing. So an all-purpose process of information, towards the end of mobilization, towards the end of fundamental societal change.
WBAI's Wednesday morning show host, Mimi Rosenberg, describes what the other hosts bring to their 6 to 8 a.m. slots on Monday through Tuesday and Thursday through Friday.
I am delighted to say that the new morning show, which has really 5 days, most of which have different personalities and individuals who are co-hosting along with Michael G. Haskins, I think are very rich. I am not into personality-driven radio per se. I want people, and I think all of the respective hosts make people feel comfortable. They're bringing more and more kind of cultural sensitivities and ways of expressing the political material to the morning show format, and are beginning to each one feel their own right. And I love the idea, frankly, that there are a variety of people who have a diverse political perspective, all progressive, but each has their own unique sensitivity and a cultural outlook. And I think it's very healthy, and it's becoming a very, in total, rich and fertile environment to ground and become the anchor for all of the rest of the programming that happens throughout the course of the day. So I'm really excited by the format and the input of program director, interim program director Murillo, what he brings as a host, and what he has brought conceptually, and all of the different personalities that are here. And most importantly, because each one of us is committed to that, we take our cues, we take a lot of our information and a good deal of our sound and the voices from the listening audience, which informs and makes the morning show. They are the real hosts for all of us.
But to understand what she brings, we're going to rebroadcast some of the show. We'll start with a segment she recorded in April, interviewing American Friends Service Committee spokesperson Dr. Joseph Gerson, discussing the international crisis that the United States and the big European powers have over Iran's nuclear fuel generating capacity. We'll begin with the part of the segment where they're discussing the failure of the West to also look at Israel's actual stockpile of nuclear weapons.
Israel's real fear, it's a real concern, its goal at the moment, has less to do with Iran becoming a nuclear power and more with maintaining sanctions and keeping Iran as weak as possible, suffering as much as possible. This is not in anybody's interest, and I think we all recognize that what Israel is doing, say, in relationship to Palestinians, its relationship with the Arab world, is really ultimately not in the interest of the Israeli people.
Well, I want to follow through on that. While the militarist narrative focuses on Iran, since Israel's nuclear reach, its radius of nuclear terror, which now extends as far as Tehran or, northern Pakistan, and who has a flotilla of German-built nuclear-capable submarines, isn't Israel really the elephant in the room?
Well, it's one of the elephants. The United States is certainly an elephant too. This takes us back to, among other things, to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which will take place beginning at the end of this month in New York. Israel says it lives in a dangerous neighborhood, therefore it needs nuclear weapons. It got them as essentially a consolation prize from France for the failed effort in the Sinai War back in 1956. But the reality is that certainly since 1995, the world's nations, and at least verbally, the United States, have been committed to creating a Middle East nuclear weapons-free zone, which would obviously include Israel as well as Iran. In 2010, when the last NPT review conference was held, and they came forward ultimately after long and difficult negotiations with an action plan, basically keeping the NPT somewhat stable. It's an essential treaty. The United States committed to co-convene a conference to be held in 2012 in Helsinki toward the creation of a Middle East nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction free zone. But the United States never co-convened that conference. And the rest of the world is, to say it's upset would be an understatement. I've been to a number of international conferences with heads of state and foreign ministers and so on. And I mean, there's just real anger that the United States has failed to co-convene this conference, and further, of course, that the nuclear weapon states have refused to fulfill their commitments in the NPT to begin good faith negotiations for the complete elimination of their arsenals. So what we face actually as we come into this year's NPT is many nations of the world having severe doubts about whether what the United States says is credible. So we face a real challenge in this year's review conference as to whether they can come to an agreement, because so many countries have doubts about the U.S. commitments. And if this conference fails, then we face a much greater danger of nuclear weapons proliferation. And of course, that's not the only source of our nuclear dangers.
I just also want to get some more background, and we'll get back to the NPT. How will events in Ukraine conceivably have far-reaching effects on the NPT regime? Recently, President Vladimir Putin said he was ready to put Russia's nuclear weapons on standby during tensions over the crisis in Ukraine and Crimea. His comments, I believe, were aired as part of a documentary on state TV recently. So where do we stand with that to inform the whole discussion?
This is why I said that the proliferation is only one aspect of the nuclear dangers that we face. I mean, what we've seen with the crisis in Ukraine was that early on, both Russia and the United States exercised their nuclear arsenals as a way of threatening the other side. And on the one hand, this could obviously escalate into an intentional nuclear war, or you also have the danger here of miscalculation and accidents, either of which would be absolutely calamitous. So on the one hand, we face, once again, an increased danger of nuclear war. We're sliding into what some call a new Cold War, which we hope can be averted. And it has great impact both on the NPT, and I would also argue on climate change. In terms of the NPT, if you have the United States and Russia building up their nuclear arsenals back into a somewhat spiraling arms race, the last thing they're going to do is to make major commitments toward disarmament or toward fulfilling their obligations under the NPT. And so we face danger to that whole to the whole NPT system. And on the other hand, as Michael Clare has written and said, the reality is that when you have international tensions or threats of war, that's not when you have the most creative diplomacy. And it's that kind of creative diplomacy that we need if we're going to get agreements that are going to stanch climate change.
Dr. Gerson, one of the other things that we spoke about off air, and I want you to just elaborate upon, is the progress on nuclear disarmament and the establishment of a Middle East zone free of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. I believe these are themes that are going to be central to the successful outcome of the next review conference. Yeah,
no, as I said before, it is centrally important because the United States, on the one hand, this is what the really almost all the nations of the region want, with the exception of Israel, and the United States has committed to move this process forward, but then not fulfilled its commitments. So again, as we go into the review conference and other diplomatic environments as well, the question is whether the United States can be believed. If we can't be believed, then you're not going to have agreements. And you have a breakdown of the diplomatic system and more drift toward conflict and war. I mean, simply to say that, as we've seen with some of the rhetoric related to the Iranian nuclear program, nuclear weapons technology is now more than 70 years old. I mean, just think in terms of smartphones, or how they've evolved over the years. They used to be very advanced technology. Now they're not anymore. I mean, any self-respecting physics PhD should know how to design a nuclear weapon. So you face the danger of a Middle East-wide nuclear arms race, and I think this underlines the importance of moving to create a nuclear weapons-free zone. And again, with the weapons of mass destruction, which we see being used, in Syria among other places, moving toward a regime that removes these from the region, would certainly provide a whole lot of security to a whole lot of people.
One of the things I know that we had also talked about is I was thinking about the Hibakusha, the surviving victims of the atomic bombs which fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and are known to have been really shining examples themselves for turning their personal tragedies into struggle to promote peace and to create a world free of nuclear weapons. They are going to be attending the NPT conference, and we also have people from the Marshall Islands. And if people don't remember, there was atmospheric nuclear tests in March of 1954, I believe, which spread radioactive fallout over the inhabited Marshall Islands, and their representatives are coming. How important is that, and how will that really inform this 2015 review conference?
Yeah, well, for most people, nuclear weapons are an abstraction. And, one of the challenges is to help people understand what they are and what they do. The reality is that the Hibakusha of Japan, actually, there's some who were slave laborers from Korea there who have also survived and will be with us. These are people who could describe what actually happened with what, by today's standards, is a small nuclear weapons, with the exception of one of the Marshall Islands, which was 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima A bomb. And I just say my own evolution back in 1983, after in New York and here in Boston, we blocked an initiative to turn our harbors into nuclear weapons bases with all of the nuclear weapons accidents and dangers that would come with them. I was invited to come to Hiroshima for the first time. And my experience has been that these are people who have suffered just excruciating, both emotional and in many cases physical pain, and who have, as you said, transformed this pain into one of the most enduring forces demanding nuclear abolition. I mean, just incredibly courageous people.
On the same show, she covered the elections in Ferguson, Missouri, with local activists there.
And we are moving to cap off our programming. Voters in Ferguson, Missouri, headed to the polls for the first municipal election since a fatal police shooting last year led to weeks of unrest in the St. Louis suburb and exposed deep divisions between the city's largely white police and government and its majority African-American population. The election for half of the city council's 6 seats could shift the body's racial makeup. About 67% of the city's 21,000 residents are African American, according to a 2013 census estimate. But the council has just one African American member. Ferguson's mayor, who is a council member at large, is also white. Reginald Rounds, a Ferguson organizer with the Black Organization for Struggle, who's done a tremendous amount of volunteering, including canvassing and driving people to the polls. I know I'm going to say good morning, but I know that we dragged you out of bed after a long night. But welcome to WBAI and to give us the results.
Thank you very much. Results weren't exactly the way we want them, but there were a couple of positions that were changed, and African American was in there. Although the people I was actually trying to get in to make it, it's still just the beginning. So I think that it will be good.
Mimi Rosenberg discusses that day's morning show segments.
Also, what was discussed this morning, we went to look at the relationship of U.S. colonial imperial policies as it affects and has distorted the growth and development of Africa. And specifically, we looked at the failed state in Somalia in 1991 and the policies and practices of the U.S. and how, in many ways, that informed the growth and perversion of the group that we now know as Al-Shabaab, which engaged in this horrific murder of roughly 150 students in Kenya. In any event, the issues that I looked at, I would suggest are always geared to peace and justice, but I'm most profoundly concerned about the issue of human rights and how that informs any struggle. And within that, with great specificity, the issues of law and social justice, the issues around bigotry and oppression of different groups of people. This morning, certainly there was a great deal of focus on the African American community, i.e. the continuing look and observance of not the people of Ferguson as victims, but the African American community in Ferguson as setting the pace throughout the country now for the evolution of groups like Black Lives Matters and for informing our struggle here in New York. So my programming really is geared to peace and justice. It's also geared to those issues that are censored and or distorted by mass media and, for that matter, liberal media, which certainly doesn't give vent to the activist component. So no matter what we talked about, whether it was nuclear non-proliferation, whether it was U.S. policy in Africa, whether it is about the individual situation of, or really institutional racism in the form of police murders around the country, it is always there specifically to give voice and substance to those who are affected by those policies and those who are in struggle against them, towards the end of really enriching the struggle and, I hope, contributing in some way eventually to the movement and institutionalization of what is now certainly fragmented groups that are indeed in struggle, but at some point need to collectivize their energies because there is a systemic issue that confronts all of us. So it was a robust magazine format that, at the heart of, continues to look at issues of human rights and human abuses, whether in the work site. And I should say that I also think that some of the programming that I explicitly bring to the morning show format is, we did a piece on low-wage workers. We did two pieces on car washeros who have been on the picket line for 5 months trying to work for the creation of a union and a contract. Car washeros are car wash workers, and they are called car washeros, like people who work in coffee shops are baristas. And these car wash workers, 5 months on the picketing line all winter, and they finally wound up unionizing and getting a contract. The other group of workers that we looked at was those workers from McDonald's who said, hey, this $1 increase that McDonald's claims it's giving, which to only are a very, very small number of people because most of the franchises have their own pay scales. Their position was too little, too late. We're going out across the country, across industry lines on April 15th for the largest strike ever in this country of fast food workers. That, to me, is part of the reality of racism. It's economic racism. It is people of color most prominently affected. But I think it's very important to look at people both in the community sphere and as workers in this society. So that's some of what any one Wednesday morning, Wednesday edition, as part of the morning show lineup will cover.
The richness and depth of Mimi Rosenberg's Wednesday morning shows are unmatched on other stations' morning shows in the New York area. Her careful attention to activist voices breaks through the corporate media's monodimensional worldview. I highly urge viewers to tune in to the WBAI Morning Show Monday through Friday on 99.5 FM and on the internet at WBAI.org, where you can stream the show or listen to the program archives. That's it for tonight's show. This is John Riley for Progressive Community Media. Tune in again in 2 weeks for another edition.
The program that I've tried to develop over the last few months is this program Talkback. Talkback has been on BAI for years. This is one of the things that we implemented back in the early 90s, where we recognized a need for consistency on the schedule to build expectations in the listeners, get the listeners engaged and involved, and make them a part of it. There have been several people who have taken it on. So we have now Ron Daniels, who's going to start, the president of the Black World in the 21st Century. We have attorney Gloria Brown Marshall, who's going to start on Tuesdays doing the Talkback slot at 10 a.m. And then I was successful in getting John McDonough and Malachi McCord on Wednesday, and on Thursday John Kane. So we have a very diverse group of people there, different perspectives, different worldviews and experiences, and personal experiences, and I think that, with the consistency of the listener guests kind of back and forth, I think is going to hopefully build an audience and people will appreciate it.
Floor boss, he's the boss's son. He thinks that he owns everyone, just like his daddy owned us all before. I don't care about his college degree. Man ain't one bit better than me, and I